December 27, 1967. The air conditioning units in the CIA station at Tan Son Nhut hummed against the 90-degree heat that pressed through reinforced windows like a living thing. Fluorescent lights flickered over metal desks scattered with intercepts, field reports, and satellite photographs still wet from the developing tanks. Frances "Frankie" Fitzgerald sat alone in Station Room 7, her coffee cold, her eyes fixed on a single sheet of paper that had arrived from the Mekong Delta 2 hours before dawn. The paper bore the classification "Immediate Priority" and contained 17 words that would change everything. Coordinated movement patterns detected across all northern provinces. Timing suggests major offensive during Tet holiday period. Outside the compound walls, Saigon prepared for celebration. Street vendors arranged offerings for the Year of the Monkey. Buddhist monks swept temple courtyards with bamboo brooms. Children practiced dragon dances in narrow alleys, where motor scooters competed with ox carts for passage. The city exhaled incense and expectation, unaware that intelligence analysts 3 miles away were documenting what appeared to be the largest enemy troop movement in the war's history. Fitzgerald had been tracking anomalies for 6 weeks. Radio intercepts that didn't match seasonal patterns, supply routes active during traditionally quiet periods, and a series of coded transmissions that referenced lunar calculations with unusual frequency. Each piece of evidence arrived separately, analyzed in isolation, filed according to bureaucratic protocol that prioritized administrative efficiency over strategic comprehension. But, when assembled chronologically, the fragments formed a picture that made her hands shake as she reached for the secure telephone. The morning briefing at Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, began with weather reports and supply statistics. Colonel William Henderson, Deputy Intelligence Chief for 2 Corps, reviewed overnight activities with the methodical precision of a man who had never been wrong about anything important. Helicopter maintenance schedules, artillery expenditure rates, casualty reports from 4 provinces where contact had been lighter than expected. When Fitzgerald presented her analysis of coordinated enemy movement, Henderson's response arrived with the casual dismissal reserved for theories that contradicted established wisdom. "Another ghost hunt from the spooks," he said, not unkindly. The room filled with knowing smiles. Intelligence analysts were notorious for discovering elaborate conspiracies in random data, for transforming statistical noise into strategic threats that existed only in their imaginations. The Vietnamese communists were guerrillas, opportunistic, disorganized, incapable of sustained operations beyond company level. They hid in jungles, struck from tunnels, melted away before superior firepower could find them. They did not coordinate nationwide offensives. They certainly did not attack during their most sacred holiday, a time when Buddhist tradition demanded peace, even from sworn enemies. Henderson closed Fitzgerald's report without reading the attachment. "File it under possible future reference," he said. The meeting continued with discussions of R&R schedules and the upcoming Bob Hope USO tour. Nobody mentioned that intelligence networks across South Vietnam were reporting similar anomalies: movement without precedent, preparation without explanation, silence where there should have been communication. The Central Intelligence Agency's Vietnam operations represented the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering apparatus ever deployed in a counterinsurgency environment. Electronic surveillance stations monitored radio frequencies from the DMZ to the Mekong Delta. The Phoenix program maintained informant networks in every major population center. Satellite reconnaissance photographed suspected base camps with resolution capable of identifying individual weapon types. Signal intelligence specialists decoded communist communications faster than their intended recipients could read them. Every intercept was catalogued, cross-referenced, and distributed to analysts who specialized in specific geographical regions, enemy units, or operational patterns. The system produced approximately 2,000 intelligence reports per month, distributed to commanders who rarely had time to read summaries, much less detailed analyses. Information moved up the chain of command like water through increasingly narrow channels, filtered at each level by officers who understood their careers, depended on providing superiors with intelligence that confirmed existing plans rather than intelligence that demanded new ones. Fitzgerald's station monitored communist radio traffic in Military Region 3, the zone surrounding Saigon. During normal operational periods, her section intercepted perhaps 30 significant transmissions per week. Since early December, that number had tripled. Radio operators who normally transmitted for seconds were staying on the air for minutes. Coded references to flowering season and family reunion appeared with increasing frequency in messages that discussed logistical coordination rather than tactical planning. Most disturbing, traffic analysis indicated that normally independent communist units were synchronizing their communication schedule, suggesting command coordination at levels the intelligence community believed impossible. On January 15, 1968, Agent Van Duke Min arrived at the CIA station in Mai Tho, carrying intelligence that would later be classified as the most important single report filed during the war's early years. Min had worked for the Americans since 1965, infiltrating Viet Cong supply networks in the Mekong Delta. His information had always proven reliable, his reports precise and verifiable, but the intelligence he presented on that humid Tuesday evening challenged everything American commanders thought they knew about enemy capabilities and intention. According to Min's sources within the National Liberation Front, communist forces throughout South Vietnam had received orders to begin Phase 1 of a coordinated offensive designed to coincide with Tet celebrations. The attack would target not military installations but population centers, provincial capitals, airfields, government buildings, and the American embassy in Saigon itself. Communist commanders expected to hold captured objectives for 72 hours, sufficient time to demonstrate that American military superiority was illusory and South Vietnamese government authority was non-existent. Phase 2 would follow immediately. General uprising throughout the countryside as rural populations, convinced that American defeat was inevitable, joined the National Liberation Front en masse. Within 1 week, Communist forces expected to control enough territory to justify requesting international recognition as South Vietnam's legitimate government. The operation had been planned for 2 years, coordinated by Communist Party officials who understood that military victory was impossible, but political victory remained achievable through psychological shock. Min's report included maps showing preliminary assembly area, timetables for initial attacks, and radio frequencies for coordinating subsequent phases. The intelligence was detailed, specific, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Fitzgerald spent 18 hours verifying Min's intelligence through independent sources. Electronic intercepts confirmed unusual radio traffic patterns in areas Min had identified as communist staging areas. Aerial reconnaissance photographs showed increased activity at suspected base camps. Other agents reported similar rumors of coordinated offensive operations, though none possessed the detailed information Min provided. Every piece of corroborating evidence supported the same conclusion. The communists were preparing to attack during Tet, and the attack would be unlike anything American forces had encountered. On January 17th, Fitzgerald compiled her findings in a classified report titled Analyst of Coordinated Enemy Offensive Operation Immediate Threat Assessment. The report was 23 pages long, supported by 47 pieces of physical evidence, and concluded with a recommendation that all American military installations be placed on maximum alert beginning January 25th. She hand-delivered the report to Colonel Henderson's office at 0800 hours on January 18th. Henderson accepted the report with polite acknowledgement and placed it in his pending review file. When Fitzgerald called his office on January 20th to inquire about the report's status, Henderson's aide informed her that the colonel was attending a conference in Hawaii and would not return until January 30th. The report remained in Henderson's pending file, unread, while communist forces completed final preparations for the largest offensive operation in modern insurgency warfare. January 30th, 1968, arrived with the oppressive humidity that preceded monsoon season. Saigon's streets filled early with families carrying offerings to ancestral shrines, children wearing new clothes purchased specifically for Tet celebrations, and vendors selling fireworks that would announce the Year of the Monkey with appropriate noise and spectacle. The American embassy compound maintained heightened security protocol implemented the previous week after intelligence reports suggested possible isolated attacks on government facilities. Marine guards checked identification with unusual thoroughness. Diplomatic staff minimized unnecessary movement outside the compound. But overall, the embassy operated under the assumption that Tet would bring several days of relative quiet, as both sides observed traditional ceasefire arrangements that had been respected during previous holiday periods. Fitzgerald spent the morning reviewing overnight intelligence summaries that contained nothing unusual. Radio traffic had actually decreased during the past 48 hours, suggesting that communist forces were observing the holiday ceasefire. At 1400 hours, she attended a staff meeting where Deputy Station Chief Robert Laird discussed security arrangements for a diplomatic reception scheduled for February 2nd. The meeting concluded with Laird's reminder that Tet provided an excellent opportunity for embassy staff to experience Vietnamese culture through public celebrations that demonstrated the government's control over urban areas. Most staff members planned to attend public ceremonies that evening. Several had received invitations to private parties hosted by South Vietnamese officials, eager to demonstrate their friendship with American allies. At 01:45 hours on January 31st, 1968, Fitzgerald woke to the sound of explosions that seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously. Her first thought was that fireworks celebrations had extended beyond customary limits. Her second thought was that the explosions were too regular, too sustained, too directional to be celebratory. She dressed quickly and telephoned the Embassy Communications Center, where a Marine Guard informed her that attack alerts were being received from Da Nang, Nha Trang, Kon Tum, Pleiku, and 13 provincial capitals. Early reports were fragmentary and contradictory, but patterns were emerging that matched exactly the intelligence Min had provided 2 weeks earlier. Communist forces were attacking urban targets throughout South Vietnam with coordination that demonstrated months of preparation. This was not insurgency. This was conventional warfare disguised as insurgency, executed with precision that rivaled regular army operations. Fitzgerald drove to the embassy through streets that alternated between festival celebration and military chaos. In some neighborhoods, families continued Tet observances, apparently unaware that combat was occurring less than 1 kilometer away. In others, South Vietnamese army units established roadblocks and checkpoints while civilians fled on foot, carrying possessions in cloth bundles tied with rope. The contrast was surreal. Tradition and warfare occupying the same geography, separated by distances measured in blocks rather than miles. The Embassy Communications Center had been transformed into a crisis management facility. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with pins indicating confirmed attacks, suspected attacks, and areas where communication had been lost entirely. Radio operators worked multiple frequencies simultaneously, trying to coordinate responses with military units that were discovering the extent of communist coordination in real time. Fitzgerald found Colonel Henderson in the Situation Room, studying reports that described the intelligence failure he had created through willful blindness. "How did we miss this?" he asked, not acknowledging that he had been provided with detailed intelligence that would have prevented the surprise entirely. Fitzgerald showed him the report she had filed 2 weeks earlier, the report that remained in his pending file while communist forces achieved strategic surprise that would alter the war's trajectory permanently. Henderson read the report in silence, his face reflecting the recognition that his dismissal of credible intelligence had contributed to the most significant American intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor. But there was no time for recrimination. Communist forces had penetrated the embassy compound itself, and Marine Guards were engaged in close combat with sappers who had breached the perimeter wall, using explosives and determination rather than sophisticated equipment. The attack on the American embassy lasted 6 hours and 17 minutes. Communist sappers armed with automatic weapons and satchel charges fought Marine Guards who had never expected to defend diplomatic facilities against conventional assault. The battle was conducted in darkness, broken by muzzle flashes and flares, in courtyards where diplomatic vehicles provided cover for combatants who had transformed symbols of American power into tactical terrain. Radio communications were intermittent, command coordination was impossible, and tactical success was measured by survival rather than victory. Fitzgerald spent the night in the embassy's basement communications center, monitoring reports from across South Vietnam that described simultaneous attacks on 36 provincial capitals, 5 major cities, and 64 district towns. The coordination was unprecedented in insurgency warfare, thousands of communist troops attacking dozens of targets with timing precision that demonstrated command capabilities the intelligence community had insisted were impossible. Each report confirmed what Fitzgerald had predicted and her superiors had dismissed. The communists possessed the organizational structure, logistical capacity, and strategic vision to conduct nationwide offensive operations that challenged American military supremacy directly and publicly. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. American forces were not fighting scattered guerrilla bands, but a conventional army that had chosen to reveal its true capabilities during the most sacred holiday in Vietnamese culture. By dawn on February 1st, communist forces controlled significant portions of Saigon, Hue, and Da Nang. American military commanders who had claimed the war was being won found themselves defending urban areas they had never expected to lose. Television cameras recorded images that would define American public perception of the war. Communist flags flying over government buildings, American soldiers fighting in city streets, and refugees fleeing areas that had been considered secure. The Tet Offensive would ultimately fail in its immediate military objective. Communist forces could not hold captured territory against American firepower, and the general uprising they expected never materialized. But the offensive succeeded completely in its psychological objective. It demonstrated that American military superiority was insufficient to guarantee American political success, that enemy capabilities had been systematically underestimated, and that intelligence failures could transform tactical victories into strategic defeats. Fitzgerald watched the reports arrive with emotions that mixed vindication with horror. Her intelligence had been accurate, but her warnings had been ignored until accuracy became tragedy. The report that could have prevented surprise had been filed under possible future reference, while communist forces prepared to prove that the future had already arrived. The intelligence failure that enabled the Tet Offensive represented more than bureaucratic incompetence or analytical blindness. It reflected systemic problems in American intelligence collection, analysis, and dissemination that had been developing since the conflict's earliest years. Intelligence officers were rewarded for providing commanders with information that supported existing plans, rather than information that challenged strategic assumptions. Analytical products were filtered through command structures that prioritized operational convenience over strategic accuracy. Intelligence that contradicted optimistic assessments was dismissed as defeatist or unreliable, while intelligence that supported continued operations was accepted without critical evaluation. The result was an intelligence system that functioned as an echo chamber rather than an early warning system, that confirmed what commanders wanted to believe rather than what they needed to know. Fitzgerald's experience exemplified the problem perfectly. Accurate intelligence provided by reliable sources, supported by multiple forms of evidence, dismissed by commanders whose careers depended on maintaining illusions of progress and control. The intelligence community possessed the technical capabilities to detect enemy preparation, but lacked the institutional courage to present analyses that challenged strategic orthodoxy. The Tet Offensive's aftermath brought congressional investigations, media examinations, and academic studies that would analyze the intelligence failure for decades. Fitzgerald testified before closed sessions that examined how accurate intelligence had been dismissed, how bureaucratic procedures had substituted for analytical rigor, and how careerism had compromised professional judgment. Her testimony was classified and remained classified for 25 years, but her conclusions were simple. American intelligence failed not because information was unavailable, but because information was ignored when it contradicted strategic assumptions that had become articles of faith rather than analytical hypotheses. The failure was cultural rather than technical, institutional rather than individual. Intelligence officers who challenged optimistic assessments found their careers stall, while those who provided reassuring reports found themselves promoted to positions of greater responsibility. The system rewarded conformity and punished creating conditions where strategic surprise was inevitable, regardless of technical capabilities or analytical expertise. Congressional hearings revealed that Fitzgerald's report had been one of 14 similar warnings filed by intelligence officers throughout South Vietnam during the 6 weeks preceding the Tet Offensive. CIA stations in Da Nang, Can Tho, and Pleiku had all reported unusual enemy activity that suggested coordinated offensive preparations. Military intelligence units had intercepted communist radio traffic that discussed logistical coordination across traditional regional boundaries. Aerial reconnaissance had photographed enemy troop concentrations that exceeded normal insurgency requirements. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the same conclusion that Min had provided and Fitzgerald had analyzed. Communist forces were preparing to attack urban targets during the Tet holiday period, but the evidence was distributed among different agencies, analyzed by different specialists, and reported through different command channels that prevented comprehensive assessment. No single office possessed complete information, and no institutional mechanism existed for integrating fragmentary intelligence into strategic warning. The intelligence failure resulted from organizational dysfunction rather than analytical incompetence, from bureaucratic boundaries rather than information scarcity. The personal cost of intelligence failure extended far beyond professional embarrassment or career disappointment. Colonel Henderson, requested transfer to a staff position in Hawaii, where he spent the remainder of his military service reviewing logistics procedures for Pacific Command. His replacement, Colonel Michael Torres, implemented new intelligence sharing protocols that required weekly coordination meetings among all intelligence agencies operating in South Vietnam. Agent Van Duke Min disappeared during the Tet Offensive and was presumed killed while attempting to gather intelligence on communist forces occupying his home village. His final report, filed 3 days before the offensive began, contained detailed maps of communist assembly areas and radio frequencies for coordinating attack phases, intelligence that could have prevented tactical surprise if military commanders had possessed the institutional courage to act on information that challenged their strategic assumption. Min's sacrifice exemplified the human cost of intelligence failure, the price paid by individuals whose courage and professionalism were wasted by systems that prioritized convenience over accuracy. Fitzgerald remained in South Vietnam until December 1968, when she was transferred to the CIA's Langley headquarters to help develop new analytical procedures designed to prevent similar intelligence failures. Her final report from Saigon, classified secret and distributed to fewer than 20 officials, contained a single paragraph that summarized her experience with bureaucratic blindness and strategic self-deception. Intelligence exists to provide commanders with information they need rather than information they want. When intelligence officers become advocates rather than analysts, when intelligence products become propaganda rather than assessment, intelligence fails regardless of technical capabilities or analytical expertise. The Tet Offensive succeeded because American intelligence told American commanders what American commanders wanted to hear, rather than what American commanders needed to know. This was not an intelligence failure. This was an institutional failure that used intelligence systems to support predetermined conclusions rather than inform strategic decisions. Her report concluded with a recommendation that intelligence officers be granted tenure protection, similar to academic researchers, insulating them from career consequences when their analyses contradicted strategic orthodoxy. The recommendation was rejected as impractical and contrary to military command principles. The broader implications of intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive extended far beyond Vietnam, influencing American intelligence practices, military doctrine, and strategic planning for subsequent decades. The failure demonstrated that technical sophistication could not compensate for institutional dysfunction, that advanced surveillance capabilities were meaningless when analytical products were filtered through bureaucratic systems that prioritize conformity over accuracy. Intelligence reform efforts initiated after Tet established new procedures for analytical independence, interagency coordination, and dissemination of strategic warning intelligence. These reforms would prove critical during subsequent crises, from the Yom Kippur War to the Iranian Revolution, when intelligence officers possessed institutional protection necessary to present analyses that challenged strategic assumptions without risking career destruction. The Tet intelligence failure became a case study in military schools, intelligence training programs, and strategic planning courses that emphasized the importance of analytical integrity over bureaucratic convenience. Modern intelligence analysis still struggles with problems that enabled the Tet Offensive intelligence failure. Organizational boundaries continue to fragment intelligence collection and analysis. Career incentives still reward analysts who provide comfortable assessments rather than challenging evaluations. Bureaucratic procedures still filter intelligence through command structures that may prioritize operational convenience over strategic accuracy. The technical capabilities of contemporary intelligence systems far exceed anything available during the Vietnam War, but technical capabilities remain subordinated to institutional systems that have not resolved fundamental problems of analytical independence and strategic warning. Francis Fitzgerald's experience, accurate intelligence dismissed by commanders who preferred comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths, continues to occur whenever institutional pressures override analytical integrity. The lessons of intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive remain relevant because the organizational and cultural factors that enabled the failure remain present in contemporary intelligence systems. 40 years after the Tet Offensive, declassified documents revealed the full extent of intelligence available to American commanders before the communist attacks began. Fitzgerald's report was accompanied by dozens of similar warnings from intelligence officers throughout South Vietnam who had detected preparations for coordinated offensive operations. The intelligence was accurate, detailed, and provided sufficient lead time for defensive preparations that could have prevented strategic surprise, but the intelligence was ignored, dismissed, or filed without action, because it contradicted strategic assumptions that had become institutional orthodoxy. The failure was not technical but cultural, not individual but systemic. It resulted from organizational dynamics that rewarded conformity and punished accuracy, that substituted bureaucratic procedures for analytical rigor, that transformed intelligence systems into confirmation mechanisms rather than early warning systems. The failure cost thousands of American lives, undermined public support for the war, and demonstrated that advanced technical capabilities could not compensate for institutional dysfunction. The legacy of Francis Fitzgerald's unheeded warning extends beyond historical analysis to contemporary relevance. Intelligence failures continue to occur when organizational dynamics override analytical integrity, when career incentives discourage challenging assessment, when bureaucratic convenience takes precedence over strategic accuracy. The technical capabilities of modern intelligence systems have advanced exponentially since the Vietnam War, but the institutional problems that enabled intelligence failure during Tet Offensive remain largely unchanged. Intelligence officers still face career consequences for providing analyses that contradict strategic orthodoxy. Bureaucratic boundaries still fragment intelligence collection and analysis. Command structures still filter intelligence through systems that may prioritize operational convenience over strategic warning. Fitzgerald's experience, accurate intelligence dismissed by commanders who preferred comfortable illusions, continues to occur whenever institutional pressures override professional judgment. The personal dimension of intelligence failure deserves particular recognition because it illuminates the human cost of bureaucratic dysfunction. Francis Fitzgerald spent 6 weeks documenting communist preparations for the largest offensive operation in modern insurgency warfare. She analyzed fragmentary intelligence, corroborated source reporting, and produced detailed assessments that accurately predicted enemy intentions, capability, and timing. Her intelligence could have prevented strategic surprise, saved thousands of lives, and altered the war's trajectory. But her intelligence was dismissed by commanders who found it more convenient to maintain illusions of progress than confront evidence of enemy capability. The failure was not analytical but institutional, not technical but cultural. It reflected organizational dynamics that substituted conformity for accuracy, that rewarded comfortable assessments over challenging evaluations, that transformed intelligence systems into propaganda mechanisms rather than strategic warning systems. The broader implications of the Tet intelligence failure continue to influence American strategic thinking, military doctrine, and intelligence practices. The failure demonstrated that technical sophistication cannot compensate for institutional dysfunction, that advanced surveillance capabilities are meaningless when analytical products are filtered through bureaucratic systems that prioritize organizational convenience over strategic accuracy. Intelligence reform efforts initiated after the Tet Offensive established new procedures for analytical independence, interagency coordination, and strategic warning dissemination. These reforms created institutional protections for intelligence officers whose analyses challenged strategic assumptions, ensuring that accurate intelligence could reach decision-makers regardless of its compatibility with existing plans or preferences. The reforms proved critical during subsequent crises, when intelligence officers possessed the institutional support necessary to present uncomfortable truths without risking career destruction. Training programs developed after the Tet intelligence failure emphasized the importance of analytical integrity over bureaucratic convenience, the necessity of challenging strategic assumptions rather than confirming predetermined conclusions, and the professional obligation to provide decision-makers with accurate assessments rather than comfortable illusion. Intelligence officers learn about Francis Fitzgerald's experience as an example of professional courage in the face of institutional pressure, analytical accuracy despite bureaucratic dismissal, and personal integrity when organizational dynamics discouraged inconvenient truths. Her report remains a case study in intelligence schools, military academies, and strategic planning courses that examine the relationship between analytical independence and strategic warning, between institutional culture and intelligence effectiveness, between career incentive and professional judgment. The technical aspects of intelligence collection and analysis have advanced dramatically since the Vietnam War. The fundamental challenge of institutional remains unchanged. Modern intelligence systems possess surveillance capabilities that far exceed anything available during the Tet period. Analytical tools that can process vast quantities of data with unprecedented sophistication, and communication networks that enable real-time coordination among agencies worldwide. But technical capabilities remain subordinated to institutional systems that have not resolved the basic problems of analytical independence, bureaucratic coordination, and strategic warning dissemination that enabled intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive. Francis Fitzgerald's experience, accurate intelligence dismissed by commanders who preferred organizational convenience over strategic accuracy, continues to occur whenever institutional pressures override analytical integrity. Contemporary intelligence challenges reflect many of the same institutional problems that enabled the Tet intelligence failure. Organizational boundaries still fragment collection and analysis among agencies that may not coordinate effectively. Career incentives still reward analysts who provide assessments that support existing plans rather than challenge strategic assumptions. Bureaucratic procedures still filter intelligence through command structures that may prioritize operational convenience over analytical accuracy. The result is intelligence systems that function as confirmation mechanisms rather than early warning systems that tell decision makers what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. The technical capabilities of modern intelligence far exceed anything Francis Fitzgerald possessed during the Vietnam War, but the institutional challenges she faced remain largely unchanged. The moral dimension of intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive deserves particular emphasis because it illuminates the ethical responsibilities of intelligence officers who possess information that contradicts strategic orthodoxy. Francis Fitzgerald knew that communist forces were preparing to attack during the Tet holiday period. She possessed detailed intelligence about enemy intentions, capabilities, and timing that could have prevented strategic surprise and saved thousands of lives. She had a professional obligation to provide accurate assessments, regardless of their compatibility with existing plans or strategic assumptions. But she also faced institutional pressures that discouraged analyses, that challenged command preferences, career incentives that rewarded conformity over accuracy, and bureaucratic systems that filtered intelligence through organizational dynamics rather than analytical merit. Her choice to persist with accurate reporting despite institutional discouragement exemplifies the moral courage required of intelligence professionals who must choose between career advancement and analytical integrity. The strategic consequences of the Tet intelligence failure extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations to influence American public opinion, political support for the war, and strategic planning for subsequent operations. The offensive demonstrated that enemy capabilities had been systematically underestimated, that American military superiority was insufficient to guarantee political success, and that intelligence failures could transform tactical victories into strategic defeats. Public support for the war declined precipitously after television coverage revealed communist forces attacking American installations that had been portrayed as secure. Congressional support for military operations diminished as investigations revealed the extent of intelligence available before the offensive began and the degree to which that intelligence had been dismissed or ignored. Strategic planning for subsequent operations incorporated lessons learned from the intelligence failure, including new procedures for analytical independence, interagency coordination, and strategic warning dissemination. Educational programs developed after the Tet intelligence failure continue to influence intelligence training, military education, and strategic planning instruction. Francis Fitzgerald's experience serves as a case study in courses that examine the relationship between institutional culture and analytical effectiveness, between career incentives and professional judgment, between bureaucratic convenience and strategic accuracy. Students learn about the technical capabilities available to intelligence officers during the Vietnam War, the organizational challenges that prevented effective utilization of those capabilities, and the personal courage required to persist with accurate reporting despite institutional discouragement. The case study emphasizes that intelligence failure results not from lack of information, but from institutional inability to process information effectively, not from analytical incompetence, but from organizational dysfunction that subordinates accuracy to convenience. The international dimensions of the Tet intelligence failure illuminate broader questions about intelligence sharing, allied coordination, and strategic communication during coalition warfare. American intelligence agencies possessed extensive information about communist preparations for offensive operations, but this intelligence was not effectively shared with South Vietnamese forces, who would bear the initial burden of defending urban areas under attack. The failure reflected not only American bureaucratic dysfunction, but also limitations in coalition intelligence relationships that prevented effective coordination between allies who possessed complementary information about enemy capability and intention. South Vietnamese intelligence services had detailed knowledge of communist political networks in urban areas, while American agencies possessed superior technical capabilities for monitoring communist military preparation. Effective integration of Allied intelligence resources could have provided comprehensive assessment of communist offensive preparations, but bureaucratic boundaries and security restrictions prevented the coordination necessary for strategic warning. Francis Fitzgerald's final report from South Vietnam, submitted in December 1968, contained recommendations for intelligence reform that addressed both technical and institutional aspects of the analytical process. Her technical recommendations included improved procedures for integrating fragmentary intelligence from multiple sources, standardized formats for strategic warning assessments, and automated systems for tracking intelligence dissemination and command response. Her institutional recommendations addressed career incentives for intelligence officers, organizational structures for interagency coordination, and command procedures for processing intelligence that challenged strategic assumptions. The technical recommendations were implemented within 2 years, resulting in improved analytical capabilities and more effective intelligence integration. The institutional recommendations proved more difficult to implement because they challenged organizational cultures and career systems that had developed over decades of military and intelligence practice. The psychological impact of intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive extended beyond immediate military consequences to influence American strategic culture, public expectations of military effectiveness, and political discourse about national security capability. The failure demonstrated that advanced technical capabilities could not compensate for institutional dysfunction, that military superiority did not guarantee political success, and that intelligence systems could fail despite access to accurate information about enemy intentions and capabilities. These revelations challenged fundamental assumptions about American military effectiveness that had shaped public expectations since World War II. The result was increased skepticism about official assessments of military progress, greater demand for congressional oversight of intelligence operations, and more critical media coverage of national security policies. The psychological impact proved more significant than the immediate tactical consequences because it fundamentally altered American expectations about military effectiveness and intelligence accuracy. Contemporary relevance of the Tet intelligence failure extends beyond historical analysis to current challenges in intelligence collection, analysis, and strategic warning. Modern intelligence systems possess technical capabilities that far exceed anything available during the Vietnam War, but they operate within institutional frameworks that have not resolved the basic problems of analytical independence, bureaucratic coordination, and strategic warning dissemination that enabled intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive. Intelligence officers still face career consequences for providing analyses that challenge strategic assumptions. Organizational boundaries still fragment intelligence collection and analysis. Command structures still filter intelligence through systems that may prioritize operational convenience over analytical accuracy. Francis Fitzgerald's experience, accurate intelligence dismissed by commanders who preferred comfortable illusions over inconvenient truths, remains relevant because the institutional dynamics that enabled her experience continue to influence contemporary intelligence operations. The human dimension of intelligence work, exemplified by Francis Fitzgerald's experience during the Tet Offensive, deserves recognition because it illuminates the personal courage required of intelligence professionals who must choose between career advancement and analytical integrity. Intelligence officers possess specialized knowledge about threats to national security, enemy capabilities and intentions, and strategic developments that may require immediate response from political and military leaders, but they work within institutional systems that may discourage analyses that challenge strategic orthodoxy, reward conformity over accuracy, and punish messengers who deliver unwelcome news. The result is constant tension between professional obligation to provide accurate assessments and institutional pressure to provide comfortable reassurance. Francis Fitzgerald's persistence with accurate reporting, despite bureaucratic dismissal, exemplifies the moral courage required of intelligence professionals who understand that their assessments may influence decisions affecting thousands of lives. In the end, the intelligence failure that enabled the Tet Offensive resulted from institutional choices rather than technical limitations, from organizational culture rather than analytical incompetence, from bureaucratic convenience rather than professional integrity. Francis Fitzgerald possessed accurate intelligence about communist offensive preparation. She analyzed fragmentary information with professional skill, corroborated source reporting through independent channels, and produced detailed assessments that predicted enemy intentions with remarkable precision. Her intelligence could have prevented strategic surprise, altered the war's trajectory, and saved thousands of lives. But her intelligence was dismissed by commanders who found it more convenient to maintain illusions of progress than confront evidence of enemy capability. The failure illuminated fundamental problems in American intelligence systems that persist despite decades of technical advancement and organizational reform. The lesson remains relevant because the institutional dynamics that enabled intelligence failure during the Tet Offensive continue to influence contemporary intelligence operations whenever organizational convenience takes precedence over analytical accuracy. The jungle around Saigon grew quiet in the months following the Tet Offensive, not with peace, but with the exhaustion that follows revelation. Frances Fitzgerald returned to the United States in December 1968, carrying with her the weight of warnings unheeded and possibilities foreclosed. Her classified files remained in government archives, accessible only to researchers who possess security clearance and academic patience. But her experience became legend among intelligence professionals who understood that technical capabilities meant nothing without institutional courage, that accurate assessment required analytical independence, and that strategic warning demanded bureaucratic systems capable of processing uncomfortable truths. The Tet Offensive ended with communist tactical defeat but strategic victory, American tactical success but psychological devastation. The intelligence failure that enabled the offensive demonstrated that wars could be lost not on battlefields but in conference rooms where accurate assessments were dismissed as inconvenient speculation. History is written by those who survive to remember, but intelligence is written by those who possess the courage to warn about what others prefer not to see. What should we cover next? Subscribe to keep their echoes alive.